When we talk about God's love in Christianity, the cross is, it's the ultimate symbol, right? But what if we've been missing the bigger picture? In this explainer, we're going to explore a really powerful idea, that the greatest display of divine love wasn't actually on the cross, but on the throne.
And that brings us to the central question. Look, we rightly focus on the Son's suffering, and we should. But what if there was an even greater sacrifice happening at the same time? The silent agony of the one being who had the power to stop it all, but chose not to.
So we're about to unpack an argument that completely reframes this entire story. The focus is going to shift from the physical pain happening on the cross to the emotional agony happening on the throne, the agony of the choice not to intervene.
Okay, so here's the core tension right here. The common view, the one we all know, focuses on the Son's physical pain. But this proposed view, it argues that the real test of love, the true demonstration, was the Father's emotional agony. The immense, unimaginable willpower it took not to stop the crucifixion.
This really flips the script. The paradigm shifts from an act of suffering to a choice of restraint. Love is shown not by doing something, but by painfully not doing something. I mean, it's the ultimate parent's nightmare, right? Endured for a much, much greater purpose.
Now, to make this really high-level theology feel a bit more grounded, the source material uses a powerful human analogy that I think we can all understand: the unique, terrible agony of being a parent. Just think about that for a second. Facing death yourself? That takes incredible courage. But being forced to watch, completely powerless, while your child suffers unjustly, that is a completely different kind of torture. This is what the source calls the logic of relational suffering, and it applies it directly to God.
Okay, so for this whole idea to work, you need to understand this one key theological model. It's called Monarchical Subordinationism. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it just means the Father is the ultimate, number one sovereign, and the Son is his distinct high agent. The crucial point here is that they are not the same being, and that's essential for this argument.
And if the Father and Son are distinct, well, the entire story changes. It's no longer a story about God making a sacrifice to himself. It becomes a relational tragedy, a father making the agonizing choice to sacrifice his own beloved son for the sake of humanity.
So where does this idea even come from? Well, the source points way back to an Old Testament story as a kind of blueprint, the story of Jacob and his favorite son, Joseph.
The parallel here is incredibly powerful. Jacob's great sacrifice wasn't dying himself, it was the silent grief, the agony of letting Joseph go into that pit, thinking he was gone forever. And in the very same way, the Father's sacrifice is one of silence, holding back infinite power while his Son descended into the pit of death.
You see the pattern, right? It's crystal clear. First, the favored son is sent away. Second, he endures the pit of suffering and total rejection. And third, through that very suffering, he is exalted to the palace, to a position of authority. This whole journey is presented as a direct foreshadowing of Christ's. But why? What was the point of all this agony for both the Father and the Son? The source material outlines the purpose of what it calls the project of the epics.
See, this framework sees it as a project of perfection, not just payment for sin. The Son was perfected through his suffering. The Father proved his love was big enough to include even his enemies. And humanity? We gained a guide, a big brother who has been through the absolute worst and can now lead us out.
But the project doesn't even stop there. The ultimate goal, the end game, is a concept called Apocatastasis. You might know it as universal restoration. It's the belief that this divine love is so powerful, so relentless, that it will eventually win over every single person completely voluntarily.
The logic is that the sheer magnitude of the Father's sacrifice demands a total victory. The argument is actually pretty simple. Why would a father endure that level of agony only for a partial success? A love that immense, it's argued, can only result in one thing: complete and total restoration.
And this quote, well, it just perfectly sums up the whole argument. The most powerful, most living demonstration of God's love isn't some act for himself, but for others. A father giving his most precious treasure to his own enemies, all in the hope of redeeming them.
So, we'll leave you with a question to think about. If this framework holds true, and if divine love's ultimate goal is to restore everything and everyone, then what does that mean for our idea of justice? Is justice about payment, or is it about restoration? That's a question definitely worth pondering.